Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Lunch with a Scientist. I'm Leah with Headwaters Science Institute. And as you know, this program is designed to introduce you to a working STEM professional. And we're so excited today in a moment to bring on Rachel Hendricks. So she's originally actually from out here in California in Walnut Creek, but she is located in North Carolina now and will be graduating from Davidson College this May. So she studies biology and data science and will be working at the National Cancer Institute as a National Institutes of Health Fellow following her graduation. She has spent the last 2 years as a student researcher for Dr. Karen Byrne, exploring the toxicity and use patterns of water pipe tobacco smoke, which we also call hookah, and other kinds of alternative tobacco products as well. So we're going to hear all about that today and what that means. And then to give you a little teaser for specifically her work, she's very passionate about studying the effects of tobacco use. So she created a manuscript to call on legislators to create more comprehensive tobacco regulations in the United States, and is currently working on a thesis centered on increasing understanding and more awareness surrounding these products, particularly for vulnerable age groups, aka children. So she's going to talk more about that work today, and she's hoping to take this work far into her career and her future. So very excited to welcome Rachel Hendricks and to hear more about her work. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. So happy to have you here. I understand you're going to tell us a little bit about the work that you've brought to children as well today.
Yeah, for sure. We'll touch on it for sure because you guys will be participating in that work. So it'll be great.
Yes, absolutely. So if you're watching, just a little teaser of what you're going to get today, you'll hear about some curriculum that Rachel created. And as soon as that's available, you'll be able to see that on our website alongside her talk and some other post-talk resources to bring all of this to your classroom as well. So let's get into your research. I'll pull up your presentation and let you take it away.
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, you guys. Thank you, Leah, for introducing me. And I'm really happy to be here. So like Leah mentioned, a lot of my research is focused on alternative tobacco products. And when I phrase these talks with all age groups, we kind of put it in the mindset of how can we consider use of these products when thinking about healthy lifestyles and the choices we have when making our healthy lifestyles, because these products will contribute to those choices, whether we decide to use them or not. And we should have all the information when we do decide to use them or to not. So we will get into all of that. But I'll start with myself. Like Leah said, I am from California. I'm from the Bay Area. I was born in Walnut Creek. I live in Alamo, and I've been coming up to Tahoe to ski my entire life. Down there at the bottom is a picture of me in 2004, I believe, at Diamond Peak, learning how to ski. But I think a huge part of my science career and what has brought me to the point where I'm at now is my dad was a genetics major back in 1980. 1980, for any of you guys who don't know, the field of genetics was really small. I think Genentech consisted of about 30 employees. So my dad, even though he was truly passionate about science, decided to go back to school. He went to UC Davis, get an economics degree, because he thought that was the right thing to do. Instead of doing what he enjoyed, he wanted to make money. And, you know, I respect him so much because he did what was best for himself at the time, but our family. But he always pushed me to do and study what I really enjoy and to not think about the other influences like income, but to do what I think is right and going to help other people. And so he really pushed me to be a girl in STEM, which we're finding more and more of these days. But when I was little, that wasn't necessarily the case. So he pushed me to always study biology and do exactly what I liked. And that's exactly what I wanted to do when I came to Davidson College in North Carolina. This is a picture of it down in the left-hand corner there. That is probably the biggest class size you're going to see at Davidson. It's a very small school. That's a big reason why I chose it, though. It is only an undergraduate institution. It doesn't have grad students. And that's really important when you're in STEM and you're trying to get those research positions, because then you don't have to fight with the grad students for those positions. But another reason why I came to Davidson is I swim. I'm a Division I swimmer, smallest Division I school in the country. And those are my best friends. And it's really kept me grounded while I was here, along with my research. So these two other photos on this slide are me working with the hookah pipe. Here is our hookah pipe down here at the bottom. We will talk more about it momentarily, but this is what we study in the lab, and we study the cellular effects of hookah smoke in your respiratory system. Up here in the top corner, that's the apparatus we have designed to mimic the human body when smoking a hookah pipe. So we've got what we call the lung box. Cells sit in these little containers. Here's the moist water that's coming from the warm temperature that naturally is inside your respiratory system. But all of this research that I did at Davidson has led me to my thesis. And my thesis, it came from my understanding that a lot of people didn't really know what tobacco products were, like which ones were which, what contained nicotine, what didn't. And the fact that there is a lot of manipulation in the data out there to try to convince you one way or the other. And so my thesis, like Leah talked about, is two parts. I'm writing a manuscript calling on policymakers to make more comprehensive tobacco legislation. We'll touch a bit more on that at the end. But then the other part is I created an educational unit, and you guys are going to see the educational unit today. It does talk a lot about my research, and that's why I'm here to share it with you. But this is data that I am actually going to analyze if, like Leah mentioned, you can fill out my survey at the end. We'll talk about that at the end, though. So, because this is an educational unit, we make sure everyone's on the exact same page. I'm assuming most of you guys have a good understanding of the human body. We're just going to make sure we're all on the same page of how cells work, how the systems interact, and how this is important when we talk about tobacco products. So, living things contain cells. Cells have a variety of functions. They do the basics from converting nutrients to energy to more specialized functions like neurons, which are brain cells that transmit information. When I'm teaching the little kids, we like to keep them engaged. So I do ask fun little questions in between. You will see those here. But the human body has 37 trillion cells in each of our bodies. And we have a variety of cell types. They all do something a little different, but it's those cell types interacting with each other and naturally dying and replenishing themselves that leads to a healthy individual. But like I said, cells are the basic building blocks of life. They create the structures that are in and outside of our bodies. Again, when I'm teaching the kids, we have them guess structures of the body, primarily focusing on the ones on the inside, because those are going to be very directly related to the organ systems that we will touch on. But I do want to make it clear that there are structures outside the body. You know, the skin is the largest organ in the body that most definitely is interacting with our environment. So when you put all the structures together, when you put cells to tissues, to organ systems, we see that the human body is a system of structures, and it's coordinating all of these structures to work together in order to keep us healthy and allow us to function. So this is usually where I touch with the kids to describe the respiratory and cardiovascular system to them, because those are two very relevant systems in our conversation today. And what a lot of young kids don't realize is that these systems interact. So to sum it up, you know, we're taking in oxygen into our respiratory system, in our lungs, in the very deepest part of our lungs, in the smallest cells. I'll show a diagram of that momentarily. The oxygen interacts with blood cells. So the oxygen is transmitted to the blood cells, where it then goes to the heart and is transmitted to the rest of the body. Every cell in your body needs oxygen. And you can take the reverse process of that and have that's how you exhale carbon dioxide. That is the byproduct of this process. If it wasn't for the respiratory and cardiovascular system working together, we would not be breathing, you would not be listening to me, and I would not be speaking to you. All of this requires air. So, like I said, organ systems work together. They work together internally. They work with the environment so that you can be adaptive and flexible to your environment. But how do they know to do that? The brain. The brain's coordinating everything. It's coordinating the information from our environment, but also from other organs telling the stomach telling the brain, oh, I'm hungry. These are very basic types of communication that our organ systems have. So again, when I teach kids this unit, we kind of think a little bit more abstractly of what are the types of information that we can give our bodies. And I threw up very random examples up there, but we're trying to suggest that information from our environment leads to actions from our organ systems. And so, like I just mentioned, satisfying hunger by eating, or sensations from the environment. You hear a car coming towards you when you're crossing the street. It leads your brain to register, oh, I need to get across the street so I don't get hit by a car. These are things that help us survive. And so we call these adaptive types of information. They're healthy, they're normal, and they keep us healthy. But sometimes the information we give our bodies is not healthy or normal. It's what we call maladaptive. And that's what we try to get into when we talk about drugs, tobacco, and alternative tobacco products. So, very basically, what is tobacco? It's a plant. It is a plant. There are two different types. The one we are talking about, though, is natively from South America, but was cultivated in the United States. It's part of the reason the 13 colonies were as prosperous as they were. When we talk about tobacco, particularly when we talk about tobacco in traditional cigarettes, cigars, maybe even chewing tobacco, we're talking about these tobacco plant leaves that have been picked, dried, and fermented, and chopped up. And so it looks like a little mash like that that you see on the right. And it's brown because it's been dried. It's interacted with oxygen. What's really important about tobacco, though, what's so critical that makes it such an important substance in our life? Nicotine. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance that is found in the tobacco plant. It really does influence why we use tobacco and why it's such an important cash crop. Fun fact, though, nicotine is naturally found in the tobacco plant as an insecticide. The plant uses it to ward off bugs and other animals. It's very toxic to them. And so it is pretty funny that a product that we've been taking advantage of for hundreds of years, kills most other animals. And as we will talk about shortly, nicotine is also on its own very toxic to humans. So when you think of the word nicotine, what do you associate with it? I let the kids guess. But here, I'm just going to aim at the fact that this is a very addictive substance. Nicotine is the second most addictive substance in the world. The first being heroin. So something that's synthetic, like heroin, is obviously going to be very addictive. We can manipulate it to do that. Nicotine's natural, and it's just addictive on its own. In my opinion, that's terrifying. But it is why we use these products. So nicotine leads to the release of dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter that leads to pleasure. And some people, when they use nicotine, they feel calm and not as restless. And then some people feel like they're more energized, or that they can have a better time concentrating. Everyone's very different. However, use of nicotine immediately leads to changes in your brain that are associated with addiction. Primarily, there are receptors in your brain that interact with nicotine, and they increase in number when you start using nicotine. Your brain is trying to compensate for all the nicotine in your brain that floods your brain. Nicotine hits your brain when you smoke something in about 10 to 12 seconds. So your brain kind of has no idea what to do when it finds nicotine and it goes, wow, this is a lot. I don't know how to handle it. I'm going to make more receptors so I can combat all of these extra substances so I don't feel overwhelmed. However, that is why we have withdrawal symptoms, and that is why people who start using tobacco find it so difficult to quit, because they truly crave it. Another thing we want to make sure, though, when we talk about nicotine is you can find nicotine in two forms. Yes, you can find it in these dried tobacco leaves, which we find in the more traditional cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco, even in the shisha of a hookah, which we'll talk about momentarily. But you can also find nicotine in a liquid pod. These are just pods, it's just one type of electronic cigarette. But that is just concentrated nicotine. We have extracted the nicotine from the tobacco leaf and put it into a liquid form. A lot of people do not realize that those liquid pods have nicotine. They truly just think it's some sort of liquid and a cool flavor, and that's that. But it contains quite a bit of nicotine, actually very concentrated out. And yes, there is a warning down here at the bottom, that says this product contains nicotine, but you guys are like, I gloss over that. It's not really that scary of a warning. But this is nicotine. This is just straight concentrated nicotine with some chemicals that lead to it tasting like mint. It is important to note, if these pods break, do not touch the liquid. Nicotine, again, is very toxic. It can seep through your skin and cause acute nicotine poisoning. It's very dangerous, and we're actually seeing a huge issue with this, with like little kids coming into contact with these Juul pods because they don't know what it is. It breaks, and without even knowing it, they come in contact with a very toxic chemical. So, what products have nicotine though? There are a lot of products, but we're going to focus on 3 particular alternative tobacco products that are relevant to children, youth, and adolescents in the United States, which includes electronic cigarettes or electronic nicotine devices, the water pipe or hookah, and smokeless tobacco. This includes like chewing tobacco, snuff, but we're also going to focus on the oral nicotine pouches, which is a newer form. So we're gonna get right into it. Electronic cigarettes. You may call these Juuls, e-cigs, e-hookahs, mods, vapes, tank systems, ENDS products. They're all exactly the same thing. I find that a lot of people think that Juul is somehow different than other electronic cigarettes, and that's just not true. It's just the most popular brand of electronic cigarettes. The actual act of using one of these is vaping or juuling, so you're going to see a lot of that when you read stuff about it or maybe on advertisements. But e-cigs are a little different than traditional cigarettes. When we talk about traditional cigarettes, because that's the obvious comparison here, you are burning the tobacco leaves. When you burn something, you create smoke. So when you smoke a cigarette, you are inhaling that smoke and letting it, allowing it to interact with your respiratory system. Electronic cigarettes have those pods that we just talked about. That is liquid. As you guys maybe know from like boiling water for pasta or heating any sort of liquid. When you heat a liquid, it creates steam, a vapor. When we talk about that vapor, like the heating of the liquid nicotine, we call it an aerosol. And that aerosol contains all of the same particles that is found from heating tobacco leaves. And it too goes into your respiratory system and interacts with it to cause a lot of the same long-term health effects that we see from cigarettes. But it's just a different form of the nicotine and all those other chemicals interacting with your system. A lot of people think that because it's a liquid, that it's clear, that it's somehow safer for you or that it's like more pure. That's just not the case. Yes, it doesn't have some of the same effects that come from literally burning things, like a lot of the carcinogens. However, it does contain the most dangerous chemical of them all, which is nicotine, and a lot of other chemicals that we know lead to respiratory effects like lung cancer and asthma and COPD, which we'll talk about shortly. I also want to point out that when we talk about this aerosol, which we will also mention again with hookahs, we're talking about very small particles. Smoke particles, you can think of them as big, chonky things that have a hard time getting into the deepest, darkest little nooks and crannies of your lungs. They go pretty far and they trap a lot of stuff along in the process, but they don't make it all the way. Aerosol, those little vapor particles, they are much smaller than smoke particles. They can go into what we call the alveoli, or the smallest, deepest cells of your lungs. These are the cells that interact with your blood to transport oxygen from your respiratory system to your cardiovascular system. That's partially why aerosol, the byproducts of aerosol, are very dangerous, because they can go into those cells and you can think of it as causing those cells to rot and die. It's very dangerous, and we haven't had enough time to know exactly what those do, but even just in the last 18 years, we've seen that it causes a lot of the same health effects as using cigarettes. Hookah or the water pipe. This is what I study at Davidson. It's kind of my favorite. Not that I have ever used it, but I just think, it's got a special place in my heart. You probably have never even heard or seen of a water pipe except from the movie Alice in Wonderland with the smoking caterpillar, because that's the boat I was in. But water pipes are just another way of smoking the tobacco leaf, not or liquid nicotine, but the tobacco leaf in a flavored manner. You put it up here in the head. This is a piece of charcoal. You light it like you would light a campfire. That's how you create the smoke. The smoke comes down here through the stem to the base or the bowl. The bowl contains water, hence where the name water pipe comes from. The smoke and the water interact to create that vapor, that aerosol that we just talked about, which the user inhales. Again, this is taking all of the same particles that we know are so bad from burning tobacco and just making them into smaller particles that can go farther into your lungs. A very dangerous part about hookahs, though, is how social of an event it is. This is a very standard looking hookah pipe here in terms of size and that it has one nozzle. But I have also seen hookah pipes that are 10 feet tall and have 16 nozzles, so that 16 users can use them at the same time. It's a very social event. And we're finding that in the United States, particularly in urban areas, that these hookah lounges, hookah bars, are becoming really popular social events for people to do when they go out. It's also normalizing the fact that this is like not good for you, or sorry, that it is somehow safer for you, but it is not good for you. It is actually arguably worse for you than using a cigarette. Obviously, this bowl is a lot bigger than a normal cigarette, and it's probably a lot bigger than a whole pack of cigarettes. One round of hookah, which takes about an hour for you to get through all that water and through all of the flavored tobacco up here, which we call shisha, exposes you to about 80 times the amount of nicotine that a pack of cigarettes will allow you to interact with. And so it's a very addictive substance. And sure, if you're only doing this whole session once a week, that is one thing. But if you're doing that every day, which many people in a lot of parts of the world, including the Middle East, are, that adds up. It's a huge volume difference. And lastly, we have smokeless tobacco and oral nicotine pouches. When you think of smokeless tobacco, you probably think of these products more. This is chew, snuff, dip. These are things that you put into your mouth or into your nose. You do not burn it. That is the obvious difference and where the name comes from. You are chewing it, or you're interacting with the chemicals through the membranes of your nose or your mouth. Because you're not smoking it, it does not come with a lot of the same respiratory effects that we see from either hookah or e-cigs or even just normal cigarettes, but it still comes with a lot of long-term health effects. You are just chewing on loose leaf tobacco. And as we have talked about, nicotine is super toxic. There is a risk of you swallowing this that you get the consequences of nicotine poisoning. Also, this is not flavored. Tobacco on its own is very harsh. And so this has most definitely gone out of trend just because people don't really find it all that enjoyable anymore. But if I know a lot of baseball players who chew. There are some areas where it is a pretty standard part of their culture, for lack of a better word. But now we're starting to see these oral nicotine pouches. You probably know of it as Zyn or Drift or On. You can think of these as the e-cig equivalent for smokeless tobacco. This is just concentrated nicotine with flavoring that they come into these little pouches that almost look like this, and you chew it like a piece of gum. These are a lot less toxic for you than like chewing tobacco is, because if you were to accidentally swallow this stuff, you're just going to get a bad stomach ache, but it's not going to kill you. But this is a lot more appealing, especially for the younger age groups, because of the flavorings. If I can choose something with peppermint versus like a really harsh like tobacco flavor, I'm going to go for peppermint. And that's what's leading a lot of people to start using this stuff. Also, this tin literally looks like a tin of Mentos, like the little mints. They're very inconspicuous. All of these products, besides the hookah pipe, are very inconspicuous, and that is done on purpose. So this is a table that summarizes everything we just talked about, because it is confusing and it's hard to differentiate which products contain just nicotine, which products contain the whole tobacco leaf, which ones are heated and which ones are not. But I will share this table with you guys. Survey. This will complete if you are ever curious when you're talking about certain products. But now that we know about these products, we can talk about what happens when you use tobacco. This includes the long-term health effects, but also what that means in contribution to big tobacco and what we can do to kind of stand up for ourselves. So this is a diagram from the CDC that shows everything that we know is in the aerosol from hookah pipes and e-cigs. Like I talked about, it contains all of the same substances that we know are toxic and lead to a lot of the long-term health effects from cigarettes. They're just in these ultra fine particles, which we talked about go way deep into your lungs and cause a lot of damage. But this kind of summarizes well of, yes, we now know there has been enough time to know that there are all of these chemicals and substances in the smoke, but why do we continue to use these products? And first we focus on secondhand smoke. Secondhand smoke is one of the biggest culprits of conditions like asthma for bystanders who don't even want to use these products. And when I'm teaching young kids, we compare secondhand smoke to air pollution. When there's a bad air day, like when there are wildfires outside, we try not to breathe in that smoke. We know that that's really bad for you. We can like that to secondhand smoke, which is itself a smoke, but in the case of maybe a hookah pipe or an e-cig, an aerosol that is given off that contains a lot of chemicals that are bad for our health. A lot of people think secondhand smoke is only associated with cigarettes or things that we're actually burning. But the heating of those liquid nicotine pouches or from a hookah pipe, just taking the smoke and putting it into a vaporized form, that is still secondhand smoke. That byproduct still has a lot of dangerous chemicals in it that we know can harm other people's health. And so you can think about it as you can't really do a lot to control air pollution. You aren't sitting there deciding, oh, it's going to be a wildfire day today. Therefore, I'm just not going to breathe the air. Or, no, we're not going to have wildfires today. You can't make that decision. That's obviously way out of your control and unrealistic. However, you can make the decision to expose yourself to secondhand smoke a lot of the time. You can decide not to get into the car with someone who's using an e-cig, or you can decide not to go into the house with someone who's using a hookah pipe. You even can decide to sit on a different park bench than someone who's taking hits from their Juul. These are things you can do. They're very small. They're not going to make monumental changes to your health immediately, but they're additive. The more you do things like that, the more you're protecting your respiratory and cardiovascular health and all the consequences that come from inhaling these particles. But there are some other long-term health effects that we do like to talk about, including addiction. Addiction is characterized by repeated use of drugs, even though you may know that it's bad for you or for others. You just can't help but use it. And so that's where we see symptoms of nicotine addiction, including anxiety, increased symptoms of depression, anger, frustration when you can't find what you are craving, but also difficulty in concentration. If you're always worrying about how you're going to get the next hit of your Juul, like when you're going to do it so that no one sees you, you're not going to be paying attention in class, or you're not going to be paying attention while you're driving. So it's actually quite dangerous, and it can lead to things that really inhibit our day-to-day lives. We also see a lot of different types of cancers. I am going to warn you now, these pictures are gross, but that is the point of these pictures. We're going for the wow effect. We want these burned in your retina. But oral and throat cancer are a huge problem, particularly with smokeless tobacco. This stuff is super nasty. It includes sores that are found in your gums, your tongue, the top of your mouth, the bottom of your mouth, your cheeks, in your sinuses, and in your throat or your pharynx and esophagus. They're very nasty, and it's one of those things where they don't go away. Once you develop these from using tobacco products, you can't just stop using products and they will magically disappear. That's not how these work. And a lot of people just don't realize that it can get this bad and out of control, yet because of maybe your addiction to tobacco and nicotine itself, you know this is bad. You know that these things are happening, but you're not going to stop because it is so difficult to stop. We also see lung cancer. Lung cancer is the hallmark of using tobacco products. I think everyone knows that they're associated with tobacco, particularly smoking tobacco. Lung cancer is the #1 cause of death worldwide. And the #1 way you can get lung cancer is by smoking tobacco or anything with nicotine in it. We do want to make it very clear. You can still get lung cancer from smoking something with just nicotine in it. It doesn't need to have the whole tobacco plant leaf involved in the process. So when I was little and we did health education, we had them bring in a smoker's lung and a healthy lung. And we saw, just like in this gift down here, how the healthy lung, it's pink, it's vibrant. And when you fill it with air, it fully inflates. It takes in a lot of that air. And what this gift doesn't show you is it takes a long time for that air to dissipate out, which is very helpful when you're trying to talk or run or do really anything athletic. And then you have the smoker's lung. It's black, it's sad, it's very shriveled up, and it doesn't take in air. You see, it just barely inflates at all when you give it the same amount of air that we're giving the larger lung. That means it's just not effectively taking it in or using it like a non-smoker's lung is. Lung cancer symptoms include wheezing, coughing. You're often coughing up blood, but like I just mentioned, death. Death is very common in lung cancer. It's very difficult to combat it once you have it. And then, like I just mentioned, we have asthma and COPD. Asthma is super common. I have asthma. Some people are born with it. Some people it goes away. However, people with asthma will have tightening of their airways when exposed to things like smoke or irritants in the air just in general. But then if you add into the mix something like tobacco or nicotine smoke, you're going to make that swollen airway a lot worse. And this often leads to asthma attacks when the airway itself closes up entirely. This is what a normal healthy airway cell looks like. And this is what an inflamed one looks like. It has mucus, it's swollen, the air cannot flow in and out very easily. It's a huge issue, and we actually see a huge correlation of people who live with someone who uses e-cigs and their children having asthma. We also have COPD. COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. When I talk about this with little kids, because that's kind of a mouthful for kids, we just really think of it as chronic bronchitis. I feel like everyone has had maybe bronchitis once or twice in their life, but bronchitis, when you get it like an infection just from a virus, is temporary. You take some medicine, you're sick for a few days, you're coughing a lot, and then it's gone. COPD is basically having bronchitis all day, every day. It's the same logic of the asthmatic airway, where it becomes swollen and has mucus in it, so the air cannot travel in and out very easily. But then you also get symptoms of emphysema. Emphysema is when the air that we inhale gets trapped in the alveoli, or those very small, deepest air lung cells. But the air is trapped. It makes it very difficult to exhale. So again, you're not effectively using the energy you get from air, not using it often to effectively transport it to the rest of your body. COPD is a huge issue, especially in older adults. You are 80 times more likely to develop COPD from even just 2 uses of anything with nicotine in it than from not using them at all. And COPD is very difficult to treat. You may see drug commercials with different products trying to help you manage the symptoms, but once you have them, they don't go away. And we're seeing that a lot of people who smoke cigarettes have COPD, but we're also seeing a lot of people who are exposed to things like secondhand smoke from hookah pipes or e-cigs are also having to deal with symptoms of COPD. So let's take all this together. Let's take what we know. Why do tobacco companies want us using their products? It's actually pretty simple. It's money. These are the 4 largest tobacco companies in the world. British American Tobacco, Imperial Brands, Philip Morris International. They're some of the original creators of the cigarettes that we saw in the cowboy movies and that were super popular in the 50s and 60s. Altria is a tobacco company that ended up buying Juul. So they ditched traditional tobacco products altogether, and now they just focus on the most popular brand of electronic cigarettes. They want you using their products. They realize cigarettes are going out the door. No one's really interested in using those anymore because we've made it so clear that they're bad for you. However, that clarity is not seen with alternative tobacco products. It's not clear to everybody that they also come with risks. And the tobacco companies, or big tobacco, is taking full advantage of that. They want you to be confused about which products have nicotine in them and which ones don't. They want you to be unclear about if there are long-term health effects or not. And to demonstrate this, I just Googled this morning some random keyword terms, which include electronic cigarettes, hookah, health effects, and then I also did lung cancer, just because, again, we know that that's the #1 cause of death worldwide, but also things like addiction. And it's starting to become very clear that these products are not safe. They may be safer than a traditional cigarette, but they are not safe. E-cigs were first created in 2003. That is really not that long ago. That picture of me skiing at Diamond Peak was from 2004. They have not been around nearly as long as the traditional cigarette. Cigarettes have been around for hundreds of years. We've been mass producing them for a long time, and we know exactly what they do and how many of them you need to have in order to lead to health effects. The same is not known for e-cigs. But only in the past 18 years, that's really not a long time, we're already starting to see a lot of the same health effects that cigarettes produce, such as addiction, even lung cancer, and lung cancer causes worldwide. This is not just temporary, not so serious things. These are serious long-term health consequences that once you have them, don't go away. And a lot of people don't even know they're exposing themselves to risk like this. So, what do we try to get at when we're talking about these products? Well, like I mentioned, we just want you to have all the information. You should never let a tobacco company convince you that you don't need to have all the information to make a decision for yourself. You shouldn't let them make the decision for you. It's something you're putting into your body. It is your body. You have the right to know what is in there and what consequences it could lead to or benefits it could lead to. So no, I'm not trying to say you should never, ever, ever use these products. I would like to suggest that maybe you try not to, but it's your choice. You're an individual person and you have the right to have the information to make the best decision for yourself. And I hope that if you guys take my survey, which will be available for the next 2 weeks, that message really hits home for you guys, that you guys have the power to make good decisions for yourself when thinking about alternative tobacco products. And that is all I have. And thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much, Rachel. Oh, thank you very much. I actually have a few questions for you.
Of course, yeah.
Fascinating talk. I think that it's really interesting the way the public maybe perceives these products because of the advertising that they're exposed to. And then comparing and contrasting that with the science behind it is a very interesting dilemma. So I wondered, my first question for you is how does the intersection of science about the impacts of nicotine work with this science of marketing, where tobacco companies are maybe saying, this isn't that bad for you, or do this, it's fun, but scientists know, on the other hand, that they really are very bad for you? Are there regulations to make the science more apparent, or how does all of that work?
Yeah, so great question. So a few points. First, yes, there are regulations on this type of thing. However, and this is the big part of the first aspect of my thesis, which is calling on more comprehensive tobacco legislation. Most tobacco legislation only targets cigarettes. It does not include e-cigs. It does not include hookah. It doesn't even include chewing tobacco or cigars. And so we're seeing that because the regulation isn't up to date with the science, that's contributing to people's misconceptions that these products are somehow safer for you when they really aren't. And so you guys may be familiar with tobacco legislation, you may not. In 2016, we came up with some more good practices in terms of public smoking. So you can't smoke an e-cig at a school. We do have it up to that standard. And then just in 2020, in January, and that was a huge step just because flavors are one of the key factors that influence very young kids to use these products. You know, an adult is not going to want to smoke a tutti frutti e-cig, but an 8-year-old might. And so it is really great that they caught on with that trend and try to do something about it. However, that's just going to be a slow call to action. It's going to take a few years for all those flavors to leave the market. And that's just in the United States. Those flavors will probably still continue to be made. So people in the United States will probably still have access to them. It's very difficult to control that stuff. But another point I want to make is, yes, science, marketing, they do intersect. Unfortunately, this is America and everyone is allowed to do their own research. We have government agencies that are doing it, but we also have private agencies that are doing research. And some of those private agencies are sponsored by big tobacco. So when you see the literature, it's actually very conflicting frequently to see, oh, this article says e-cigs aren't that bad for you and that they'll somehow help you quit cigarette use. When then you see publicly funded research says, hey, actually, that's not the case. Yes, they were marketed as a way to help you quit using traditional cigarettes, but you're not actually quitting using traditional cigarettes. You're just getting your nicotine fix through a new modern product. The research out there is very conflicting. And so when legislation is trying to be made, they look at all of that research and all that information. So they can't come up with like a consensus, yes, this is bad for you, or no, this is safe for you decision. And so it leads to a lot of conflict when trying to make headway in legislation and marketing laws. So there really aren't that many marketing laws, especially around alternative tobacco products, because again, they haven't been around that long, and sometimes government is slow to action.
Interesting. And so I appreciate that you brought up the concept about using an e-cigarette to quit smoking, because that was actually going to be my next question. Well, for a very long time, it's been marketed that you can use nicotine gum to slowly wean yourself off of traditional cigarettes. And now it seems like in the media, there's a big push for using an e-cigarette to get off of regular cigarettes because they're better for you. Is there any science that's talks about the right way to quit using cigarettes or nicotine? Do these products help if used in the right way, or are they really just continuing people to use more of the product, like you said?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And so, yes, anything that is FDA supported to help you quit using cigarettes is the best way to do it. Whether that is the patch or nicotine gum or help from a doctor who's helping you like in a very systematic manner wean off of nicotine. Those are going to be the most effective ways to stop using product containing nicotine. E-cigs, when they were first made in 2003, were marketed as a way to help you quit using cigarettes. They went, okay, we're going to take all the bad stuff that we know is in tobacco leaves. We're going to take that out. So it's just nicotine. So you're not getting any of the other stuff. And then they said, hypothetically, you can wean yourself off the nicotine by getting pods with smaller concentrations of nicotine. However, realistically, no one does that. And then once you threw flavors into the mix, who would want to do that? They're like, wow, this is so much better. Cigarettes don't have flavors, but e-cigs do, and you're still getting that nicotine. And that's one of the things about addiction. There really is no just one-time use. I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm just going to try it one time, but I'm not going to use it again. But then a few days later, they're like, I'm just going to take one more hit. It's not that bad. You keep using it. And so, no, you're not really weaning yourself off of nicotine from cigarettes. You're just adapting your brain to nicotine in a liquid form in a new product. And so it actually became very clear not very long after that that's what e-cigs did. And actually the original creator of e-cigs has come out and said, I made a horrible mistake. These are not helpful to help you get off cigarettes. I'm just creating a new generation of nicotine addicted individuals. So like I mentioned, things like nicotine gum, the patch, anything that's FDA approved is going to be your best bet. However, like you said, it is more fashionable to use e-cigs as a way to quit cigarettes. And some people will swear that it has worked. I know a few adults who are using e-cigs because they thought it helped them quit cigarettes. But in hindsight, they're not really quitting cigarettes. They're just becoming addicted to a new, different product.
Hmm. So it sounds like the key here, whatever you choose, is that you have to be lessening the concentration of the nicotine down to the point of zero. Otherwise, you're just absorbing it in a different way.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, your brain actually makes it makes these alterations so it has more receptors for nicotine. When you are slowly, systematically weaning yourself off cigarettes, your brain can slowly uh, prune those receptors so you don't have them anymore. So it leads to less symptoms of nicotine withdrawal. However, you can't do that cold turkey. That most definitely takes some time, and I would recommend help from a doctor if you're going to do that, because they help you manage some of them, try to come getting yourself off of nicotine, because some of them are pretty nasty. There's both
Mhm.
uh, mental but physical ones.
It's fascinating that your brain is involved in the withdrawal process.
Well, yeah, it's the biggest factor, really. Um, because yes, once you stop using nicotine, it might immediately feel a lot easier to breathe. You're going to be coughing less, but your brain is craving that release of dopamine that leads to pleasure so badly that it's going to make you angry when you can't have it, and you're going to feel anxious and restless and jittery. So there most definitely are some mental side effects that I think make nicotine addiction as difficult as it is.
Hmm. Well, we could go on forever, but I want to go to just a couple other questions. How is nicotine itself derived from tobacco chemically? How do they separate it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's actually a pretty complicated chemical process. But basically, we can extract it, and then kind of like how we can now make drugs and like mass produce drugs and bacteria through genetically modified microorganisms. We can do the same thing with nicotine, so we can mass produce it in these giant quantities, and so you can create different concentrations. It's a bit of a complicated chemical process, but basically, when you see tobacco free on them, what that really means is that they've just extracted the nicotine. So the rest of the tobacco plant isn't there. It's just the nicotine. And that's just unfortunately, that's a very confusing marketing tactic to make it seem like it doesn't have nicotine in it when it really does.
I see. Interesting. So today, the research that you presented has focused a lot on kind of the social perceptions of tobacco use and how we can improve those, how we can change the regulations. I wonder, do you plan to continue to pursue tobacco use from this angle, where you're really looking at the social aspect, or do you think you'll study at some point specific impacts on the body? Where would you like to go with this work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The reason we kind of started focusing on the social impacts was because of the pandemic. We really had to be flexible and adapt the research because, pre-pandemic, I was working with cell cultures and exposing them to hookah smoke directly in the lab. But then once we couldn't go into the lab, we started looking at it from a more like behavioral social perspective, because that is a huge part of using these products. Yes, there is cellular issues and effects that happen, but why do people keep using them? And so why do people use these products is a huge driving question in the field, and we really don't know a ton about it because people usually focus on the more cellular biology aspects of it, not necessarily the social. But when I go to the National Cancer Institute, I will actually be focusing on cancer, given in the name. But I would really love to continue to explore addiction, how people, because some people are more susceptible to all of these health effects and to things like addiction than others. And so really looking at it from a genetic perspective is something I'm very interested in, because again, that's something we haven't really touched on. It's very difficult. There's probably not going to be just one answer. It's not going to be very clear. But, if we have a sense of how addiction runs in families or how nicotine affects certain individuals differently than others, that could help us better understand ways to help you wean yourself off nicotine, or why certain people should or shouldn't use these products in the first place.
Hmm. Neat. There's a lot of places to go with your work.
Yes.
So, how exactly did you get to this point in your education and figure out that you wanted to study nicotine and tobacco? And what would you recommend for prospective student who maybe wants to study something similar?
Yeah, for sure. So when I got to Davidson, I just knew I liked science. I really didn't know much else besides that. I think I kind of scared myself from research, especially my freshman year, because I went, that just seems so boring. I'm a very social person. I don't want to be in the lab all the time by myself. That's not really what I want to do. But I also knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to commit to something like med school, which is a problem a lot of people who enter STEM face, just because sometimes it seems like those are your only two options, research or med school. So I decided after about a year that I just at least wanted to have some experience in research. And I would recommend for anyone who's interested in science that research experience is awesome, because it's teaching you to formulate your own questions, conduct your own experiments, come up with hypotheses. These are skills that you will use no matter what you do in the science field. So it's a good way to get used to it through a cool research topic. And at Davidson, we have a ton of different labs. However, it really just worked out that there was only one opening for my grade, and it was in this lab. And I was always interested in my dad smokes tobacco, now he chews. Smoking's been a huge part of my family. And I was always really interested in like why they kept doing it. And even though they knew it wasn't very good for like me and my sister, who were just always standing by. So that's kind of how I got started in the research. But then it has transformed into this more social, more psychological research that I love. It's so fascinating. Really, drug use altogether and why people use these substances is so fascinating to me. So I would say if you're someone who's interested in research, don't be afraid to do something that seems a little out of your wheelhouse. I most definitely went into this lab not knowing how to do anything. I didn't even know what a hookah pipe was. But just through taking the time to read up on the information, learn the skills so I can do them well, I'm now deemed a hookah expert, which is hysterical. But I am a hookah expert technically, and it took a year just because I was passionate about doing the job right. So again, don't be afraid to do something that's a little out of your wheelhouse. Get out of your comfort zone. It could open the door to something that you will be passionate about forever, or it'll teach you exactly what you're not passionate about and help you find the route that is better for you. So yes, I love this research that I'm doing. It's fantastic, but it has shown me that I'm not going to just stay in research. I also want to add a clinical side to it. And so that's what I'm going to do at the National Cancer Institute. But I would have only figured that out if I had gone down on this adventure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that advice. It's super valuable to the students who will be watching, I'm sure. And like Rachel mentioned, we do have a research experience program. If you want to know what doing research is like, you can check that out on our website. And Rachel herself actually helped one of our students with a survey that is being put out right now about alternative tobacco use in high school students. So lots of connections, great things to do with your research and good places to go with your work. And so the last thing I want to say is that there is a survey component of Rachel's work right now, which really helps her go back and show cause for what she's been doing. So please check that out on our website, or we'll link it with this post when we put it up. And thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.